Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to another Big Data London webinar. This one we're taking a look at the results of our yearly 4th Industrial Revolution report. I'm Andy Steed, Content Director of Big Data London, and I'm joined today by Paul Maher of Positive Marketing. Hi Paul.
Hello.
James Lupton of Cynozure. Hi James.
Hey everyone.
And Abhas Ricky of Cloudera. Hi Abhas, how are you?
Hey guys, not bad. Morning. Afternoon.
Yes, afternoon for us. Yeah, just a couple of things before we go into the research. Firstly, you'll notice your attachments box at the bottom of the screen. That actually has a copy of the research if you'd like to download it for later, or to even go along with the webinar. There's a questions button there as well. Please do ask any questions. We'll try and get to them in the course of the discussion. For anybody here who's been to a Big Data London webinar in the past, this one's going to have a slightly different feel, I think, because we'll be putting some of the research up on screen, and then we'll be cutting back and discussing the implications, getting the insights of James, Abhas, and Paul on that one. Also, just a quick note of housekeeping. If you lose the stream at any point, you shouldn't, but if you do, just hit refresh in your browser and you should jump straight back in. However, our first port of call is Paul. I'm going to get the first couple of slides up on the screen, and Paul will talk us through before we cut back at a discussion point. Okay, so over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, thanks for joining, guys. And so what we are going to talk about in this session is the 4th Industrial Revolution report. And interestingly, it's not only the 4th Industrial Revolution report, it's the 4th year that we have ran this. So we have now got pretty good insight of how the Industrial Revolution, the 4th Industrial Revolution is affecting the UK. And how we come up with this, that's going to be a question, I know, so just to give you some comfort that this is a very significant piece of research, is that we have looked at 250 data leaders, and they are from the largest organizations in the UK, split down into subsectors of financial services, retail, public sector, telco and high tech, and media. And I'm sure if you ask nicely, that Abhas and Andy can give you all the depth of data you need for that. How we come up with the questions is also something that comes up. So just to give you some comfort on that, we have got a steering panel on Big Data London, and that is really the great and the good of the AI and machine learning industry. There are people on there from government, people on there from regulators, and from the private sector. Just to give you a flavor of who these folks are, we have representatives in senior roles at Legal & General, Essential, the events company, and Thames Water, amongst many more. And if you want to know more about that steering committee and how to get involved again, I'm sure Andy can help you through that process. So with that, I think maybe straight into some data. And one of the things that we wanted to find out about, given that this was the 4th year that we ran the report, and something that comes up a lot, is legislation. And clearly with the change of events over in America and the emphasis now on big tech and regulations, there are a lot of questions about who is actually the right people to lead this, how does one look after one's data, who has sovereignty over that, etc. So we asked the question around data law and what people think that needs to happen. And quite clearly, very opposite to this month, and as we're doing this webinar, there is the question around Brexit. The number one question about what needs to happen with our data law is that the UK data leaders, we need a lot more clarity on what's going on with EU legislation. Now, bear in mind, this set of responses comes from August and September of this year, and you can see that if anything, that number is likely to get higher. Other responses of note are that people are thinking they may need to delete a lot of data as we go into Brexit, need to store more over in Europe, need to get their SCCs sorted out so that we're clear on what's going on with Europe, and that we're being asked by customers, they have concerns about data. And of course, finally and ultimately, and one I suspect would go up even more if we poll, as we poll again for 2021, is that we need some clarity on the UK data privacy. So that's what we're seeing, Andy, and over to the panel.
Yes, 1 second. So, yes, James, I mean, this is obviously quite a subject of the times, as it were. Is this something that's reflected in the people you're talking to at the moment? You know, is a greater need for clarity something that is mentioned?
Sure. So I think there's been a continual focus on the sort of legal side of data and making sure people are compliant with any regulations that they operate in. But since the kind of hump of GDPR, where that was a massive focus, and it's what for us lots of customers were just talking about, seeking advice on, that's kind of settled down now. People are into that, they're used to it, they've basically are set up how they're going to be set up for it. And that kind of focus on the regulatory stuff has largely shifted into the background as a BAU focus for people. Now, Brexit in some of our international clients in particular has definitely come up as a massive conversation, and for lots of them, data is a big feature of that conversation about where's it going to live, what does the changes mean for what they store, where they store it, how they use it, and whether that has a major impact or not. And the answer for a lot of them is they don't really know yet. They're still trying to get to grips with, do they need to make foundational, fundamental changes to how they're doing things, or actually is it not such a big shift and it's not going to be tons of work? So yeah, it's definitely generally I think that stuff's moved into the background. Brexit's pushed up some of those conversations to the forefront again as we approach that. Yeah,
another hump to get over this year. Do you think this rings true? I don't want to spend too much time on this one, but do you think it rings true with the people you're speaking to?
Yeah, I think so as well. The only additional point that I'll add from what James said is currently, if you look at majority of the businesses, data security, the legality around that is just a way of doing business. So it is an additional pillar. It's an additional value stream that didn't exist when GDPR happened a couple of years back, right? And it's not just GDPR. A lot of regulations came to the fore. If you look at financial services, whether it be MiFID or MiFID II or IFRS or any of those implementations. And even if you look at healthcare, like HIPAA certifications started to come into the picture. So I guess there was a huge influx of reg tech per se, and which was new to a lot of people a few years back. Now it's become pretty much lay of the land. And I'm not saying that people are almost there where they need to be. I'm not saying that people are prepared to the extent that they need to be, but it definitely has gotten better. And definitely people are treating that as yet another value stream for their business, which used to be an afterthought in the previous era. So that is a consistent theme that we saw last year, and that's a consistent theme we see this year, more so given the fact that post-COVID, data has become a matter of trust from that perspective, and that's why it's just an ongoing process of improvement.
Perfect. So I'm going to flick up to the next slide, Paul, about responsibility within the business for data. So if you'd like to expand a little bit on this.
Absolutely. So this is one of the slides that gets the most conversation going around the industry. And what we've done consistently now is look at who is operationally responsible for data. Interestingly enough, the first year that we did this, the CEOs, Chief Executive Officers, were those with the most responsibility. And in the subsequent years, we've noticed that has slowly reduced, quite markedly reduced over the years. And now you'll see, if you look at the black number above the CEO, that is the direct responsibility. So 2% of respondents of the 250 folks we spoke to said that their CEO is directly operationally responsible for data. As I say, that number's gone down. It's gone down dramatically, 77% this year. And if we go round clockwise now, you'll see the chief digital officer, chief data officer, slightly up at 34%. And then down at the bottom here, we have the rise of the risk mitigators or the regulators, and you'll see some significant increases here. So, the cyber risk management is up 200%. The DPO up 84%, and 100% year on year up is risk and compliance officers. So there's a lot more of those roles being recruited for, and assuming responsibility for operational responsibility for data. The chief product officer down quite a lot at 53%. And one statistic which isn't on the slide, which is obviously of interest, is the CIO. And just to run through the numbers from 2018, 19, and 20, in 2018, CIOs reporting to the CEO, that account, 13% of them were operationally responsible. That dropped dramatically in 2019 to 7% and stabilized a bit this year back up to 8%. So maybe that is sort of stabilizing around that sort of 7-8% of organizations have that role responsible.
Perfect. So so my first question is going to be to Abhas here, and I'm going to pick up on the person who from that slide now seems to have the greatest responsibility, with the chief data officer. Relatively new role, and it seems to be very prominent. I mean, are all the businesses that you're dealing with now having a CDO role? Has that guy got an executive seat? Is that happening? Is that a trend that seems to be taking place in the people you're dealing with, Abhas?
Yeah, so I think I'll respond to your question in two parts. One is the role of CDO itself and how it's viewed within organizations, and then the percentage of organizations by industry, how many of them actually have a CDO at the executive table, let's put it that way. So the role of CDO has evolved. Now, if you go back to the classical data capability model, which a lot of organizations went through, it was all about good governance starts from good data. And therefore, a lot of people viewed the chief data officer as the custodian of data, but they renegated them in a way in form of architectures, data cleaning, how the data is collected from one point to the other, the data nomenclatures, the privacy, etc. And majority of the P&L functions, majority of the end consumer application impact was either delegated to the chief digital officer or the chief information officer, depending upon however you were structured. And there were, of course, multiple ways in which people have structured organizations, whether that be hybrid or nascent or federated, depending on whatever that might be. But if I had to pick one key statistic, almost 74% of the organizations had the CDOs report into the CIO. Now, if you come fast forward now, I would say a lot of that is changing. And that's largely because of the fact that data is becoming fundamental to new revenue streams, and not just as a cost optimization play, and not just as something that they can use as a good thing to have. The era of cloud has actually accentuated that even more, because everyone can go to the lines of businesses. And where does the liability lie in that respect? But at the same time, the lines of businesses are very much within their right to not be dependent on an old legacy archaic CIO function to deliver a hardware, and that takes 6 months, and then procure software, and that takes another 6 months. So they can just go to the cloud providers now and run everything in an agile fashion, which accelerates the new product development. So when that shift has started to, whilst that shift has started to happen, if you look at the large organizations, so this is the second part of the question, large organizations in financial services or telecom, which are relative, or even retail, which are relatively more advanced in terms of analytics, they definitely have CDO functions. Now, some of them actually still have the CDOs reporting to the CIOs, but they're taking note that we probably need to give them a seat at the table. In fact, what has also happened, to Paul's earlier point, that we've also started to see CIOs becoming board members. There's a large UK bank whereby we have seen that phenomenon, which actually makes sure that your end-to-end digital and data strategy, or even your cloud strategy, which happens to be, by the way, the business strategy for a lot of organizations going forward, it's dealt with in the right fashion at the right table. So percentages-wise, I would say there are certain industries whereby majority, 70 to 80% of the organizations that we deal with, largely Fortune 500, they have a CDO in place, and at least they're moving in the right direction in terms of roles and responsibilities. Some industries that are, I would say, laggards, not leaders in that space, they're still playing catch up. And that's not because of the fact that they don't know what to do or there's not a realization, but it's just a matter of change, and change takes time. And budgetary constraints have popped up because of COVID and everything else. So, but the optimism that I will end my answer with is, like someone said, one of the leading CEOs, that COVID has done for digital transformation in 10 months what it couldn't have had done in 10 years. And I think if we all believe that that's here to stay, because the way consumers interact across industries has fundamentally been redefined and will continue to change and evolve, then the role of CDO will become increasingly more important.
Perfect. And James, whilst I know you've got a personal history in large companies, we were talking about it earlier, and Cynozure deals with a number of larger companies. I'm going to ask about some of the smaller customers that you have, mid-sized companies, so we say mid-market. Is the CDO role becoming a thing at those size organizations, or who is the most in charge of data at a non-enterprise company in your experience?
Well, I think Abhas hit the nail on the head there around how the conversation around data is shifting to one of value, and value often now being defined as in, this is something that can financially contribute to the business and enable new products and services. And that drive to a conversation about value from a move away from being about governance and we've got to manage this data and so on, has helped business leaders understand that actually this is a thing that needs someone properly looking after it and focused on it, and therefore it doesn't necessarily belong as something that the CEO or the CIO or whoever does on the side as well. It needs proper care and oversight. Now, I mean, at least 3 or 4 of our clients right now are actively recruiting CDOs into them, and we're seeing that just continually be a pattern. But I think, when we do our data strategy work with organizations, we are often recommending in that they need some form of data leadership, and you definitely do meet resistance in that sort of mid-market space where they recognize they want data leadership. They're not necessarily recognized to give that the title of CDO, put it on the board that it's potentially a head of data that's maybe going to report into the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, wherever it aligns best in that organization. So the recognition of the need for data leadership, definitely there in the mid-market. The willingness to give it the title and seniority of a C-level position is less adopted, but we're definitely seeing a trend in that way. And I think next year after, we'd be having a very different conversation about the mid-market in that space.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I'm gonna go on to our next slide now, and it's around sort of priorities and budget. So Paul, if you'd like to just pick out some of the key points from here.
I'd love to, and this is another big slide, big piece of a big finding from the research. I'll start at the bottom if I may. So firstly, average spend on data initiatives, and bear in mind it's across these are larger organizations, but across the field is 1.8 million. Now that number in itself is down 500,000 from 2.3 million in the previous year. So one might think that people were becoming more efficient or becoming more economical with their data initiatives, but within this number we can see quite a lot of variation, and you can see that the insurance and financial services folks, as they were last year, are the highest spenders in the space, followed by media, where there's obviously been a lot of change this year in terms of Netflix, etc., Zoom, all of those types of companies. And then public sector perhaps spending a little bit more. If we were to do the survey today, I dare say, given the amounts of money put into things like track and trace, that public sector spending, although it increased 16%, would have increased a great deal more. So interesting that the spend is generally down. Still significant amounts of money being spent on this. And then moving up to the top now, we see that budget clearly at the time of survey here was a big concern, followed by data quality, which was 2019's top concern. And then in 2020, accountability and key metrics, perhaps echoing a little bit of what James was saying about, we need to find the value in these initiatives, being the third biggest priority for folks' budgets. And last year, as I say, data quality reigned supreme, followed by data governance and data tools. How do we do this, and which tools do we use?
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to come to you first, James, this time. Obviously, I think that the budgets have gone down. We can probably speculate as to why that's happened. So it's not a surprise that budget is high on the agenda. If you take the other two, the data quality and the accountability, why do you think that those have come up high? And obviously, there's only room for 3 there. Is there anything else that you've run into that has been a particular concern this year?
So I think Paul hit the nail on the head there when it comes to accountability, that as organizations look to use data to actually drive their business forward, they need a way to measure that, they need a way to judge it, and someone's got to be responsible for how data is being used to make their organization successful. So that is driving a need to have that accountability, to have the right metrics and measures in place to judge progress and success on moving that stuff forward. So that would be my guess at why that is driving that accountability piece. And I think data quality is just, I never go into an organization and they go, my data quality is fantastic and we've got no problems and we couldn't improve it. It's just, it's a problem for everyone to differing degrees. And I think the more people try to leverage their data to create products and services, particularly as they try to potentially monetize and commercialize those services and create customer-facing offerings, they suddenly realize, I cannot put this junk data in front of a customer. It might be good enough for an internal report or to do some analysis internally, but if I put up, for sake of argument, a customer's orders history somewhere in a report and it's wrong, that's a different kind of problem I've got. It's interesting when you think then about the things that kind of aren't on that list as a focus. I was speaking to a COO of a global recruiter last week, and she was saying that talking to her peers, a lot of them are using these last few months as a period to double down on innovation and using it as a chance, particularly in the data and technology spaces, to get ahead of competition and invest in new things, in whether that's AI, whether that's machine learning, whether that's creating new products from their data. But they're taking it as an opportunity to get ahead and, or at the very least, not fall behind with that. So I think that drive to actually not stand still while this is going on, because there's lots of research and evidence that shows that during tough times, organizations that double down on innovation and research come out the other end far more successful and far more engaged. That's one of the other kind of big drivers that I'm seeing in organizations as well.
Perfect. And Abhas now, just to recap on the question, it's around this sort of the priorities we just saw, budget, data quality, and accountability, and anything else that you've noticed, especially recently, that seems to be top of mind for big business folk.
I think there's one large bucket in addition to everything that was put on the screen, and that correlates to everything that I just said about digital and digitalization in general. So, of course, one of the key things that happens is your customer journey typically changes. The way your customers are interacting with you, the user experience, the web experience, multi-channel becomes important. The way you deal with customers' data, not only their own data, but also the financial services data, because if they're having an e-commerce platform built into their overall product streams, that changes as well. But fundamentally, all of that can be bucketed into one key area, and that's about consumer privacy and protection. And I think that varies by the type of digital data that you have. So a lot of people have created digital data-based decision-making processes. A lot of people have SEAL teams per se, because you can have the importance, you can have a different varying importance level. So some might think that the content of the email or identifying the email correspondence or the downloaded files is more important. Some might say that location data or the usage of the online chat rooms and the content for the websites browsed might be more important. So it depends on which one you're looking at. But ultimately, it's all about digital data, including the apps, including the times of internet usage, etc. And there has been a lot of survey which has proved that consumers generally trust companies that limit the use of personal data and respond quickly to any untoward incident there might be. So I remember there was a survey which was done, and they were tracking respondents' trust by practices, and the two top criteria was wherever the end provider is not asking for information that's not relevant to their product, and they react quickly to hacks or breaches. So it has a massive impact on the brand value. It has a massive impact on how customers are actually perceiving you as an entity, because consumer concerns over data collection and privacy are mounting, but there are only few adequate protective precautions that have been taken. So therefore, the collection and disseminating or even usage of the digital data, whether be it cookies, whether be it browser history, or whatever the case might be, is a very important subject, and a lot of people are putting initiatives and budgets in place to make sure that that is tackled through in a thorough manner.
Perfect. So we're going to go back to the slides again, Paul. So I'm going to put the next ones up. It's about cloud barriers and cloud drivers. So there'll be two in this little section, but they're both interlinked.
Fabulous. Yeah. So I think the way to look at these is, barriers are sort of like the braking system. What's stopping you from moving ahead and putting all your data in the cloud? And then the drivers are obviously more like the accelerator, and you'll see why I'm using that analogy in just a second. So clearly the top barriers this year are, we're busy doing other things. We can speculate if that's because every data initiative is successful. I suspect not. But that is the number one thing, and the people are fighting for their data to be put onto the cloud, and there are other priorities within the organization, whatever they are. Secondly, and this is the piece I think we may want to focus on, is security concerns. And there is a reticence for many organizations, especially large ones, especially in regulated industries, to give their data over to cloud providers. That remains significant. And thirdly, and almost weirdly, is people seem unclear as to the enthusiasm of the folks that are working there. Again, is this because people are worried about quote unquote robots taking their jobs, or is it just genuinely people just can't get behind putting their data onto the cloud? So those are the breaks, if you will. If we look at why people want to put stuff on the cloud, now we look at the drivers, and seemingly contradictorily, the data is the data, guys, as they say in research. Data security is the top reason that people want to put their data on the cloud. So it's not only is it a reason that people are nervous, but people also see it as a reason to put their data on the cloud. We'll debate that in a second, I'm sure. Another thing is the seeming simplicity, and I know James in particular will talk about that when we talk about new tools in a little while. It might seem simplistic, and it might seem like a good solution to move everything to Azure, Amazon, wherever you're putting that. And the other thing, and Abhas mentioned this already, and I think he's spot on, obviously, knows what's going on out there, is that lines of business are driving people to put data loads in the cloud.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll come to the first one, the sort of slight contra-ingenuity in there, that security appears in both lists. We actually spoke about this previously. So I mean, Abhas, in terms of a cloud driver, or in terms of a cloud barrier, let's say, are you finding security to be more of a barrier or a driver for people making big cloud decisions?
I think data security in general is always top of mind for majority of the organizations that we speak to. The results which Paul just shared might be reflective of the sample size who participated in the survey. And as we've discussed in the past before, that if you look at large organizations, they have massive IT budgets, and they have a lot of legacy application systems. So anyone who's been around in the IT world, people, once they buy an enterprise data warehouse solution, they never take it off. They might just migrate part of that to something else, a new shiny object, but those things stay. So for a lot of legacy companies out there, which are the large, humongous brands across industries, by the way, they have multiple challenges around complexity, architectural simplicity, etc. And therefore, they rely or tend to rely on solutions which are at least hybrid in nature, whereby they have control over their own data. And also, they are able to get rid of some of the data center cost that were very high. But on the flip side, if you look at the digitally native companies, a lot of the website digital businesses, which are new, small, medium business enterprises, commercial businesses, they probably view the large CSPs, cloud service providers, as a better alternative than having to themselves invest into something and building the whole thing bottom up. So it's a buy versus build conversation for them. And with the onset of cloud and the models in which they're going towards, it's not even build, operate, transfer, as we used to call in for a lot of the other bits, right? So there are multiple ways in which you can actually measure the benefits. The simplest way would be that it vary by consumption models, and you can divide that for your own company based on your application maturity, your infrastructure maturity, and the run rate benefits that you will have for KPIs around that, but also the one-time transition costs. So what I mean by that is whether you look at lift and shift virtual machines or IaaS or PaaS or anything else, SaaS, etc., you can have a different levels of application maturities. You can have multi-tiers, you can have fault-tolerant machine images, you can have a move towards DevSecOps, however you see fit. You can have different types of infrastructure maturity considerations, and that involves everything from tenancy and hosting and automation of infrastructure, operating model, etc. But when it comes to the actual ROI and the actual benefits, so in addition to the run rate benefits, which happen to be around large buckets, around percentage productivity increase versus IT spend, or time to market, or the change versus your run ratio, you have to look at two large buckets. One is the percentage transition cost versus IT spend that you will incur to be able to get to your steady state, which a lot of people underestimate. And the second one is the payback period by workload type, because that matters a lot, whether it's an analytical workload or it's an operational workload. And that is one of the things that helps through. So in summary, I don't think it's a barrier. I think it's definitely a driver, but different types of customers, different stages and different sizes of organizations react differently. And you can assess the maturity in a very high level way, just as I said, but of course there are multiple frameworks out there for you to be able to take a more informed decision.
Perfect. And obviously there was only three there, Abhas. Is there anything that you've been seeing coming up that's been pushing people towards the cloud? I mean, it's pretty it's a foregone wisdom kind of thing that, you know, that this is something that people are going to have to do if they haven't already done. You know, movement to the cloud is a trend that is ongoing and is only speeding up. Is there anything recently that, you know, that wasn't mentioned in that list that perhaps you'd put forward as a driver towards the cloud, or barrier if
No, I think there is definitely a realization that cloud is by far the biggest and the fastest growing revolution per se that we've seen over decades, right? We haven't seen something grow as fast with such a big baseline. So if you look at the largest CSP providers, they're growing at 30 to 50% or more on baselines of $10 to $40 billion, depending upon who you pick. And that is not a normal phenomenon. But there's definitely an acceptance that hybrid cloud is the way to go forward with. And that is a combination of public cloud and private cloud, however you want to see it. But ultimately, architectural simplicity and having a similar architecture across, whether it's your own data center, run, managed, operated by someone else, or somebody else giving you the entire service, is top of mind. Because as supply chains and the value streams start to become more complex, the application architecture starts or needs to be evolved. And if you have similar architecture designs, it helps. So a lot of the considerations why people are going there is because they want to get away from their old 25-year-old architectures they've had. And I think that in itself is a separate point for me, in addition to the data security bucket. And that is one of the key things that we're seeing.
Perfect. And James, I think Abhas touched on it certainly in terms of size of company perhaps and maturity, data maturity perhaps. Do you think that the reason that the security answer appeared on both sides of the fence, as it were, is a size of company thing? The slightly larger, it's a barrier for the larger guys, a driver for the smaller guys, or do you think it's just horses for courses?
I definitely think if you're a sort of mid-market or smaller organization, the idea of investing heavily into staff to manage a cybersecurity team and all the operations that go around that, and the investment in any technology and platforms to support that, is probably not a massively appealing thing to do. And likewise, the bigger you get, the bigger the brand gets, the more imperative it is that you do invest in those things, because the potential fallout is increasing the bigger your brand gets. So you really need to be looking after it. So I think when you're down in that mid-market and smaller space, the shared responsibility models offered by AWS, by Microsoft, and so on, that's just a kind of no-brainer for a lot of mid-sized organizations to say, great, if I can give away as much as possible to highly skilled teams. I think Microsoft said they invest something like $1 billion a year in cybersecurity. That is not a level of investment that many companies in the world could match, let alone mid-size firms. So why not let Microsoft take care of as much of that as possible for you and focus on the bits that you can to be safe, whether that's things like privacy by design and how you actually architect your solutions and applications and so on. So yeah, I definitely think a market size is going to have a massive impact on your approach and attitude towards that. But I think Abhas started with this point, security is a concern for everyone. It's more just about how you approach dealing with that and how you invest your time and money to deal with it.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that gets a little bit of light on it. We're moving on to a slide now, which Abhas actually touched upon a tiny bit in his answer, I believe. So it'd be good to expand on it about the types of workload that that people are dealing with in the cloud. And there's a little bit of information here on how maybe that's changed. So over to you, Paul, in terms of the slide.
Yeah, thanks, James. So thanks, Andy. So yeah, I was looking back at last year's version of this slide, and it's rather similar actually. Not a lot's changed, but you can see, if anything, I would say the things have moved slightly this way. So the way to read this slide is, if you're on the left, you're a cloud phobe, because 0% of your workload has been migrated to the cloud, and if you're on the other side, then you're a cloudophile, if you will, and you've got a lot of stuff in the cloud. I mean, and as you can see, the majority of folks at this stage, when we're looking in 2020, the majority of people are smack in the middle. So around, for the operational workloads, somewhere between 30 and 50% is where the majority of folks are. So about half of their operational, the workloads that they run the business with, are in the cloud. And if you look at the analytical, it's slightly below that, lower numbers here and more spread out, with a tendency on this long tail here over towards the people who are really very passionate about the cloud, if you will, who trust it a lot. You can see that some people, 7% of folks, are putting 70% of their workload into the cloud. So as I say, this is a work in progress, but gradually it's shifting, as we said earlier, to more and more of these workloads being shifted to the cloud, with a slight leadership, which is consistent from last time, with operational data.
Perfect. So I'm going to pick up on 2 points from the data there. So Obviously, the data that we collected in 2019, there was a small percentage who weren't running any workloads in the cloud. It was 2%, but that has gone down to 0%. So no respondents said that they weren't doing this in the cloud. And there was a rise slightly higher of analytical workload at around sort of 50%. So Abhas, given you mentioned this before, is this what you're seeing? Is this becoming a more mainstream activity? Are more people doing this? Are more people putting more of their analytical workload? And why? Why are they doing it as well?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the percentage of workloads that Paul was mentioning earlier, it's pretty much on the lines that we'd expected. So 2 years back, we went around and spoke to majority of the CIOs across industries, and we said, what percentage of your workloads do you expect to be in the cloud 3 years from now? And they said roughly 30-35%, which is where exactly the survey was showing as well. So no surprises over there, and that's where they're headed. And that's also because of the fact that these are very large organizations and they have a lot of on-premise applications and a lot of workloads there. In terms of the type of the workloads, now, naturally analytical workloads are ephemeral for a lot of the use cases by design, and you can take advantage of that. That's the entire premise for cloud, whereby you have separation of storage and compute. And if you look at the overall cost incurred, persistent workloads have much larger cost base depending upon the type, again, the details behind it. But generally, ephemeral workloads and analytical workloads have a correlation. And that is what we're seeing. So things like, if you look at financial services, I want to run a compliance report once a week. Or if I want to do stress testing, if you look at telco, if I want to run a churn analysis in a specific area, if I want to do simulation on network planning. So these are things that you don't necessarily do all the time. Whilst if you look at the persistent workloads, whereby you have cybersecurity 24/7, 365, the way you're tackling as an organization is very different. And so I'd say that the type of workload is one element, but also your priorities as a business, what capabilities you have, and a host of other features come into the picture whilst deciding which one to move. And one large nuance on top of that we did not ask on the survey in terms of workloads, are they production workloads? Are you doing this just for a proof of concept or a trial? So a lot of customers will move workloads just as a POC or a trial, but their production workloads will continue to stay where they are because they don't want to break the system as it is. And a migration of a large-scale application. So there is a bank we know, and they make millions of dollars of transactions almost every hour. And the consumer-facing app on our phones that we have, they are tied to the same set of data. So they don't want to move that to the cloud just yet because they're preparing for that, and that might just take them a year around that. So it's also dependent upon the use case, and it's also dependent upon whether it's a production use case or something that you're trying it out as a innovative concept. So by definition, if you're trying out something new and you want to prove value very quickly, naturally the tendency gets towards analytical workloads, and they tend to go onto the cloud, whereby you can take the advantage of the data store and the existing infrastructure and the paraphernalia around it and just do your data science experiments. So those are some of the things that we're constantly seeing across industries.
Perfect. And James, is this come as no surprise to you as well? Is this the way the market's moving, do you think?
Yeah, and I mean, my theory behind what those numbers are actually telling you, and I think it comes down to people are really, really bad at decommissioning legacy systems because they can't build a good business case for it. And what that comes down to is, 80% probably or more of firms I'm going into where we're talking about architecting new data platform solutions, it's the cloud. It's a no-brainer. They've not got an on-premise, or they definitely want to get off it and are moving into the cloud. But it's one thing to say, build a platform in the cloud. When you get to then turning off existing stuff that's running and you're talking about migrating it into the cloud, from a business value perspective, what's the business case? You get the same thing you've got now, but you've got to spend 200 grand to move it from here to here. That's not something business leaders want to invest their money in. So you've got this place where a lot of people have moved off a lot of what they're doing on their legacy data warehouse platforms, a lot of their legacy systems, but the idea of a complete move off is such a massive program of work to shift all that infrastructure, all that data, all the process, that people just aren't ready to make that jump. So they're then adding new workloads, often in that analytical space in the cloud, because they can easily switch on services. It's very adaptable. It can scale up and down and so on. But it's just sort of, they've got this thing staring at them in the corner that's a big legacy system that's still being used and still consuming stuff that they haven't got the business case to switch off right now. So, I expect a lot of people will suddenly make a big jump on that from being at maybe 50% to suddenly being 90 or 100% in kind of one leap, because they have to undertake a massive program of work to shift over.
Perfect. And so, I am moving us onto our final slide now, which is a look at some of the technologies that people are investing in or tending to invest in. It's quite a large slide, so I don't think Paul's going to go through every technology in there, and you can certainly reference it from the attachments. However, over to you, Paul, for some of the significant things that have come out of this.
Yeah, I almost feel as though we should have the top of the pops music or the countdown music on this. This is one that gets a lot of attention. So I think a few things to notice here. Not unsurprisingly, it's the year of the massive iPhone refresh and 5G and all that sort of stuff. And Internet of Things remains at the top, as do in the top 10, as do data ingestion and data streaming platforms. So no movement at all for those entries. You will notice, though, that there are moves up the scale from cyber security and threat intelligence, real-time analytics, deep learning algorithms, and perhaps unsurprisingly, data warehouses in the cloud. So literally relational databases moving into the cloud. Also, as Andy's helpfully pointed out, there are some brand new entries onto the top 20 list, essentially. So data streaming is one of those multiple hybrid cloud vendors, and hybrid cloud with a single vendor are all beginning to sort of encroach on some of the stuff we've seen. You can see that some of the technologies which have been around for a while, so AI is a bit of a catch-all, public cloud platforms and private cloud platforms are not where people are focusing. Perhaps that's because they've done a lot of spending there already, maybe other reasons that the panel could discuss.
Yes, perfect. So I'll come to you first, Abhas. I've got a couple of open-ended questions here, rather than going through the what's gone up, what's gone down. I'm quite interested to hear about technologies you're hearing a lot about from your customers. What they're getting excited about and what you're getting excited about over the next year. What do you expect to be in the list, or expect to be higher in the list, and what sort of technology have you got your eye on moving forward into 2021?
I believe the large buckets are very similar to what we're hearing last year. And when I say large buckets, it's still machine learning, data science, data engineering, artificial intelligence, and streaming, right? But the one slight nuance that we have observed is the definition of what machine learning means has started to evolve. So for a lot of people before, machine learning was data engineering workloads. That was ML pretty much. And everything around actual AI use cases was either kept for CEO speak or some science experiment somewhere, which you would use for your marketing engines and tell the story that look how far we have come along. That I see has started to evolve. A lot of people have actually started to do actual machine learning and AI use cases, even on a day-to-day processes. For example, we have a retailer who are working on a platform, and they've been able to not only do advanced predictive modeling, but also combine that across multi-channel improvements. So for example, they can tell if I have logged in onto my iOS device, MacBook, phone, or through my email through a third device, and if I'm on a journey for buying a specific ticket for an itinerary, let's say. So if I just bought a flight ticket, they know that this is the same individual who's logging into the other one, and there is a high likelihood that that person should be buying a hotel ticket to combine with that, for example. So this is not a real example, it's confidential, but I'm just giving you a sanitized example. So that they're doing at scale, not just for a test group of 50,000 customers, but for the wider 18 million customer base that they have. So they've come of age. So one of the things that we're starting to see is that a lot of people have started to put production workloads as far as ML is concerned, and that is a new nuance. Similarly, for streaming, streaming in general for a lot of people before was a net new concept, and they viewed as a lot of technologies are out there in the market, whether it be streaming databases or streaming ways for collection of data from edge to AI, however you see fit. But a lot of people have started to take that more seriously and have started to make event-based streams of data a much key part of their overall design framework as far as how they're designing applications and the architecture itself. And naturally, technologies associated with that are top of mind. And the last one, of course, the effervescent cybersecurity. And given the fact that COVID happened and naturally a lot of businesses started to see an uptake in the digital ways of doing business from their end consumers, that has seemed to gone up as well. So I would say those are the three large buckets, which were there last year, purely comparing to last year, which are still here this year, but there's just an uptick and people have started to go the second level down and have started to invest not only in terms of resources for science projects, but actually have started to take it more seriously and are making it more mainstream as part of their day-to-day functioning as well.
Perfect. And same question to you, James. I'll recap it just in case, but what do you think largely is going to what is going to be the exciting technologies that we're going to see over the next 20 to 21, and what are you hearing and what are you enjoying working with? What's exciting you at the moment?
Sure, I think there's two things that I'm personally excited about and think we're going to be hearing. One, we're definitely going to be hearing a lot more about. One, I think we already are seeing it on the chart, but it's about how we deliver it. So the first one is around kind of what I'd call commoditized data science. So the offerings that are starting to come out from some of the major cloud vendors, where you can access an API that they've built that will do recommendations, feed it some products information, it will give you a recommendation that will do fraud detection, that will do image recognition or speech to text or what text NLP analytics for you. And suddenly you've got services available that are built by expert teams of data scientists that you as a, say, general software engineer or data engineer can suddenly access and use, which means that a whole range of businesses that have perhaps been unable to afford or have been reticent to invest in building the skills internally that is required to build that stuff. That is not a small investment in data scientists, the right levels of data engineers, the appropriate technology to build that stuff. They can suddenly start to get into that AI and ML game at a much lower barrier to entry. Complementary tech to those kind of pre-built APIs and is also tools like Data Robot, SageMaker, which are helping people go through the journey of building a model and managing a model in a much more kind of supervised data science as a service kind of way, where it's going to help you do model selection, it's going to help you do hyperparameter tuning, it's going to help you ultimately manage the model and keep it relevant and fresh to make sure you've got no model drift. That kind of space of tooling that's going to help bring data science, AI, ML to the masses and make it far more easy to get into that space, I think is really exciting. And that's in some ways about doing some of the things that we've seen on the list there in just in a different way. It's an enabler. The other big thing for me is data ops. And that's really a collection of technologies rather than a specific technology. And the conversation around that has really kind of stepped up over the last year. I mean, we only have to look to Big Data London last year. I think we had a data ops track there. I've seen vendors rebranding existing products to data ops as just a name, but as a principle of how do, as an organization, I ship higher quality products, data products more quickly. that, I think, is something that people are going to want to focus more and more on as they start to look to get more value out of the door. You know, how do I bring all of that great stuff from DevOps and the software engineering has been doing and apply it to data? And you know, that's been under a transition for quite a long time. You know, things like source control, it's really basic things. You know, who's not doing that these days? But starting to think about test automation and how that applies to data. How do I move large sets of data between environments and make sure they're suitably anonymized, so that I can automate regression testing when I make releases and solve some of those data quality problems that we're hearing about by making sure I don't publish bad data and make bad decisions from it. And there's some huge stats when you look at research by people like Gartner, by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US, that show, you know, bad data quality, time spent fixing bugs, and so on, depending on when you catch them, costs millions of dollars to an organization a year. So that collection of things that makes up data ops, and that approach as well, because it's more than just technology, but the approach that goes with that is something that we are now having more and more conversations with our customers about implementing. It's still an immature industry as a whole. So I think we're going to see a lot of development and a lot of new products come to market that are trying to solve parts or all of the problems that fit in that space.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'm just going to finish off now, because we're actually coming to the end of our time. It's absolutely flown by, hasn't it? So over to you, Ricky, for a last word. We were talking about data transformation. I think a lot of what we've spoken about has been about data transformation. I'm very aware that, you know, a lot of people who are watching this and people who are reading the report will be, you know, on a journey, whether that be at the beginning or halfway through. What's some words of advice of what people should be looking at or should be considering at the moment, you know, as they sort of tackle these transformations? What, you know, what sage advice or what things have you picked up from going around, you know, the market? Are you would you say would be good to pass on to those folks?
Yes, so I think two common themes that we've seen across industries and across geographies, actually. A lot of people are under a lot of budgetary pressure because of COVID, and that has started to impact their plans for next year. And B is the fact that they're being asked multiple questions around time to value. So show me the business case, show me the business value, as we've discussed as well. So I bucket those two questions in two areas. One, the most common question that I get is, show me the TCO, total cost of ownership. Does it work? Does it not work? And then we'll take a decision. And for the other one is that, how fast can I get the value? Because a lot of people define the business cases or the value in different shapes and forms. Some people make it about risk. Some people make it about cost. Some people make it about new revenue streams or service improvement, right? So as far as data is concerned, naturally, a lot of people are viewing it for their applications and use cases in different ways from a data strategy perspective, I meant. And if I have to respond to the two key areas, TCO and business case, the way we typically look at it is there are three large buckets. One is data operations, and I guess James touched upon it a little bit. So for us, you have to look at the data lineage, the management of the data views, and the data discovery and the quality. The second large bucket is security and data governance. That's the technical metadata management or the business metadata management and the security ops. And then the third one is the overall cluster management there might be, which includes cluster stand-up, cluster upgrades, and issue resolution. So all of that, which I said just now, is an important element which helps you with your operational costs there might be. But then, of course, you look at the other bits as well, and that includes your technology costs, which is where a classical CSP provider or third-party solutions come into the picture. And you will need that for different things. Some people, in addition to using the top three cloud providers, will go for a separate cluster monitoring tool, or some people will go for a different workload optimization bit. But the nuance over there is that whilst you're using that, you have to make sure that you take into consideration the complexity of integration, because you have to integrate that with a lot of systems and applications there might be. So if you're onto a planning phase, and if you're thinking about what to do in next year, then the two ways to look at it is start from the use case, not at a business unit level. And then second, once you have the use cases and the workloads defined, make sure that you're looking at all the elements of the TCO. I just gave you a few examples over there, the few large buckets, but make sure you have that before you make a decision going forward. Because otherwise there might be a lot of hidden challenges, complexities, costs that we might overlook. And it's very hard to pivot after you've gone down a specific route long enough.
Perfect. Oh, thank you very much. And I think our time is about done with that. But it's been a great discussion, and it's been great to share the research with you. Obviously, we usually do this at the physical event, so we had to delay the launch of the research. So we're really glad to be able to get it to you now. Please do download the attachment if you haven't already. I'd really like to thank the panelists. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, James. Thank you, Abhas. It's been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, look forward to seeing everybody soon, in person, maybe even next year. So yes, it's been a pleasure. And goodbye from us at Big Data London. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.